Though Batman Arkham Asylum was, in nearly every way, a success that really proved the worth of superhero games, it's often overshadowed by none other than its own sequel, Batman Arkham City. However, critically acclaimed gaming sequels often go in one of two extreme directions, so I'm not ready to give in to whatever IGN has to say about this game just yet. Instead, I feel the need to dig deeper into it and explore if it's more on the Uncharted 2 or Jak 2 side in terms of sequels. Arkham City is a far more ambitious game, that's for sure, as it grants the player a ton of freedom in how they approach every encounter, mission, etc. And it creates a much larger open world with advanced traversal, intricate side missions, and multiple DLC story packs. It feels a lot more complete as a result, like a tremendous, impactful game for the history of the industry, whereas Arkham Asylum was a more contained, subtle game that still excels at many things. The city is huge in comparison, though it's still quite small, with a map nowhere near as excessively massive as the majority of open-world games. You'll often have to run back and forth through the same areas, especially in side missions, which can get tiring. However, it's not much more common of an occurrence as it was in Asylum, and the open world itself is quite effective, which dampens the negative effects of this backtracking. There are still tons of new, memorable locations, and they're all even better than those in the previous game. While a lot of parts in Asylum are memorable when you're making your way up to them or for a while after you've played, the encounters in Arkham City get to be so crazy, so awesome, so creative, and so wild with variety that it's hard to ever forget them. Graphically, Arkham City is far more impressive, though it's still quite similar. The atmosphere of the city is unmatched in my opinion, and while the oppressive, bleak nature of Arkham Island from the first game was very effective in its own right, Arkham City is simply one of the most ingenious, perfect open worlds in tone, look, and design to ever exist. It feels perfectly oriented for the character of Batman, just like the island did, but with the way more crazy twists and turns, an unforgettable winter atmosphere, and a much more comprehensive feel that allows it to engulf you throughout the entire experience, despite, once again, its somewhat small scale. This game's atmosphere is really lovely in my eyes, as I have so many memories of playing it a few years ago while it was bitterly cold outside, and in-game the feel of Arkham City during winter perfectly matched this. I could relate to it in a way, and it's an extremely comforting world to go exploring in, even though it's filled to the brim with death, chaos, and crime. In a way, though, the hope that the character of Batman is meant to create blocks all that out, and maybe that's why I find it to be a phenomenally familiar and cozy area. It may seem incredibly strange, and I know it is. However, I think playing the game is simply such a wonderful, unmatched experience that if you actually play through it, you'll understand the exact feeling that I'm talking about. Each and every villain you'll come face to face with here is absolutely awesome as well, even if they're not the most famous. But in a way, that's more impressive to me. Yes, Arkham Asylum may have a stronger catalog of recognizable names, but City does far more with its villains to build them up and establish them as true threats. From the terrifying tyrant that is Hugo Strange, to Mark Hamill's excellent return as the Joker, the sympathetic yet menacing Mr. Freeze, and the horrific, decaying monstrosity that is Solomon Grundy. These are all great stylistically and in terms of acting, and even if I didn't know about all of them before playing through the game, I won't forget them again now that I have. Not to mention, many of their boss fights are also far better than anything from Arkham Asylum, even if they're still a bit basic. Ra's al Ghul is a standout with his blazing streak of furious attacks and trippy visual style. Clayface may be easy, but feels like a satisfying, conclusive test of everything you've learned and experienced so far. And, needing no introduction, Mr. Freeze. Mr. Freeze's boss fight is the best in video game history. Not one of, it's simply the greatest ever. At least as far as games I've played are concerned, this is the absolute best that it gets, folks. But why? Well, not only is the isolation intensity turned up to 11 due to the small, contained environment of the GCPD building, but the design of the fight is genius. You'll have to perform 5 different stealth takedowns on Freeze, but instead of allowing you to recycle any of them, you have to completely change the type of attack with each subsequent hit that you land on him. You may feel great about the great takedown you managed to perform, but he's too smart to let that happen again, so he freezes over all the greats in the room and forces you to try something completely different. It's simply something awesome that comes together so well and needs to be implemented in far more boss fights in other games. Many of the fights are still pretty damn easy and simplistic, such as Solomon Grundy, but they're just so cool in style and what's happening on screen. Not every boss needs to be challenging or in-depth necessarily, though it's a good thing if it's interesting enough to keep the player engaged, and I think City manages to do that with all of the fights, whereas Asylum was far more inconsistent. The combat in general feels far better than the last game as well, as the timing for attacks has been perfectly formed around what the player can manage to pull off with each individual enemy, allowing you to get insane combos. While I normally got only upwards of 30 hits in a combo in the last game, I got, let's just say, more this time. Yeah, this is simply a game that doesn't try to hold you back from feeling awesome, but it still challenges the player a lot. It gives you all the chances in the world to annihilate your enemies and is never unfair or irritating, but it won't let you overpower everything without issue. You must learn the rhythm of the combat and flow your attacks together with different types of hits and counters to keep things moving. Enemy variety is immensely better than the last game as well, and it is truly exceptional, as there are so many types of foes, all of which have wildly different mechanics needed in order to defeat them. Blade carriers require you to pull away from their strikes before retaliating, but if you tap and release the button each time instead of holding it, you can perform an automatic takedown, creating a fantastic risk and reward system. Enemies with body armor require lots of specific, devoted attention, but if you can efficiently counter attacks from other enemies while continuously wailing on this one for a while, you'll increase your combo massively and become practically unstoppable. Others, like the ones with shields and electric rods, are also great, and in general, just continue to pile onto the mountain of variety in this game's already phenomenal combat that brings it up to the status of exceptional. The stealth is still a little bit clunky if I'm being honest, as dropping down is sometimes frustrating, and the enemy AI once again has some laughable errors, but the new takedowns open up far more possibilities, and the way your gadgets can now be used in tandem with the typical attacks is a very welcome addition. But if we rewind the clock, why did I say that the open world was effective? It's a pretty typical one that can sometimes feel a bit empty, and though the atmosphere is phenomenal, it's very linear. So what exactly makes this game a necessary entry in the genre? Well, there are 2 reasons, one of which is very strong, and the other which is a little weak and inconsistent. Firstly, the traversal is absolutely phenomenal. Gliding has become an integral, satisfying mechanic, the grapple hook is far more versatile, and you can get updates like the grapple booster, which allows you to fly right into the air every time you use it, removing dozens of possible interruptions to your flowing motions through the city. It's a similar dynamic to what worked very well in Horizon Forbidden West, and you know if I'm comparing a game to that, it's worth your time. The second thing that sometimes helps this game to feel like a necessary open world game is having new, creative side missions. Some of these are great, like the concise yet bizarre, creepy, and memorable Mad Hatter mission, Some are interesting but end in a very disappointing way, like the Bane and Deadshot ones, and some are just a total joke. While I appreciate how many creative ideas are thrown at you in these very short missions, some of them are still pretty lazy, such as the repetitive, uninspired one where you have to stop attacks on political prisoners, which makes the crimes from Spider-Man look like a luau at Mel Blanc's house. Generally, though, these don't really detract from the experience whatsoever. We still have awesome Riddler challenges that I enjoy but will never complete because there are way too many of them, just like Asylum, and the story is totally complete and satisfying enough by itself, so these optional extra missions being a bit hit or miss isn't too much of an issue at all. And in case anyone is wondering, I'll talk about my opinions on the 2 DLCs for this game real quick too, just to get that out of the way. The Catwoman segments are fine in their own right, and in fact, the Poison Ivy boss fight as her is 200 times better than the one from Arkham Asylum, and I really enjoy the nimble, quick combat that her gameplay affords the player. But her stealth can be aggravating and unfair as hell. These segments very often interrupt the Batman story segments in a jarring way, and her traversal, while unique, feels like a lazy remix of Batman's. They're alright and fun enough most of the time, but kind of unnecessary and mediocre in my view. The return of Harley Quinn, though, is great. For a 1 hour long DLC, it's really all I could ask for. Robin's gameplay is pretty much the same as Batman's, but with unique new gadgets like a bullet shield, it remains fresh enough for the short runtime. And there are some really cool moments near the end, like the fight against an army of robots, and finally getting to beat the absolute crap out of Harley Quinn, one of the most annoying characters in comic book history. Back to the main game though, the final thing I want to address is the story. We get a lot of cool villains and moments throughout to keep things exciting, but I also just think it does a far better job of conveying the actual character of Batman than any other Arkham game. We see a personal struggle near the end of whether to save the love of his life or a city full of prisoners, and it opens up some interesting conflicts that we usually don't see in this series. It's all about the spectacle 90% of the time, but occasionally stops to look into his character, which is a nice touch. But what really sticks out to me about this story is the ending. Arkham Asylum had a cool, cinematic one, but City has a somber, shocking one. Spoiler alert, but after the genius twist that Joker was actually being given a double by Clayface, Batman destroys the fake Joker and tries to cure the real one. He hesitates for a moment though, so Joker tries to steal the cure from him, and it ends up breaking and spilling out, leading to the Joker's absolutely unexpected death. I never expected them to kill Joker off, and while I didn't expect him to remain the villain for the other games either, which was only half true for some ungodly reason, it was unforgettable and surprising when I first beat the game and was met with the true end of the Joker. It's a really brave move that impacts the player a lot and keeps us wondering what could possibly be next, and in my opinion could easily act as a sufficient ending to the game franchise as a whole. It's perfect. Overall, Batman Arkham City is an awesome game. Incredible villains with great boss fights, surprising and deep twists and turns in the narrative, beautiful visuals and atmosphere, fantastic combat full of variety, and a perfect feeling for a Batman game that makes it so easy to love. There are some issues with repetition and annoying grinding with the Riddler trophies once again, but as it stands, this is one of the best superhero games of all time, and I gladly give it a 4.5 out of 5.